Hello everyone, my name's Cosette and I'll be presenting the work from my political science honors thesis on pre-migration education level as a determinant of socioeconomic mobility of immigrants to Texas. And this project is especially meaningful to me because during the time period I will discuss, part of my own family did immigrate from Ecuador. So my thesis has 6 main components, and I will be touching on all of them today in my presentation. So for background context, the work in my thesis largely centers around the last major overhaul of U.S. immigration policy. And so this is largely centered around the Immigration Act of 1990, which constituted a shift from prioritizing family-based migration to high education or high skill level migration. And so this notably expanded upon the H-1 visa pathway, which is for professional migrants. So only those with a bachelor's degree or higher can qualify for the jobs that this visa sponsors, in contrast to the other H-2 visa pathway, which largely focuses on agricultural and livestock work and other industries such as construction and manufacturing in the H-2A and H-2B visa pathways. And so this shows how education became an increasingly important factor for feasibility of migration to the United States during the 1990s and into the present. So when I was conducting my research, my literature review broke down into basically these 4 categories. And in addition to what I already presented in the introduction and background context, what also is important to note for my presentation moving forward is that throughout the United States, there are some states where they have a highly based, population highly based in immigration, and some of these states have a higher percentage of low-skill immigration needed to bolster the economy. This is especially seen in border states. However, Texas specifically also requires a high percentage of immigrants in a high-skill position of work for the economy in industries such as education, social work, and also healthcare. And this is especially important to Texas because within the next 10 years, a large portion of the current labor force is aging into retirement. Likewise, in past studies on immigrants to the United States overall show that there are educational disparities based on both region and country of origin, where immigrants from Asia oftentimes are high-skilled immigrants or have higher average education levels, such as college and beyond, whereas immigrants from Latin America are largely immigrating with lower education levels or high school or below. And this can show educational disparity based on where immigrants from these regions or countries of origin relocate when they come to the United States. And there also has been studies that show within Latin America that some countries in South America have higher average education levels for immigrants to the United States versus countries in Central America and Mexico. So this brings me to my 3 main hypotheses for my thesis. The first one is that immigrants to Texas from Asia will have higher education levels on average than immigrants from Latin America. Likewise, I hypothesize that some countries in South America will send higher educated immigrants on average than some countries in Central America, including El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, and Mexico. And finally, that there will be a limitation in the accessibility of jobs and visa pathways for those who are low-skilled immigrants as opposed to high-skilled immigrants who I hypothesize will have higher accessibility to these pathways and job opportunities. So I utilized data for the first 2 hypotheses from the American Community Survey as well as the census to look at education data and data on where the immigrants are from. And for the final hypothesis, I utilized data from the USCIS, which talks about visa allocation for the categories I previously mentioned, so H-1B for high-skilled visas and H-2A and H-2B for low-skilled visas, as well as I then look at how this compares for Texas to the United States overall. So my hypothesis 1 analysis showed that the findings support my hypothesis, where the Latin America overall constitutes mostly a high school education or below on average per year of immigration, where the immigrants from Asia overall are constituting some college or 13 grades of schooling or equivalent or above. And this shows that there's a clear difference in the educational attainment based on region overall for average immigration to Texas. In my hypothesis 2 analysis, I first look at the countries I hypothesized that would have the lower education levels, and the green shading represents a high school education or below. So we see for all 4 countries that I hypothesized would have a lower education level than some countries in South America, that there is an average attainment of always below, from 1980 to 2022, below high school or equivalent to high school. This is important when we consider the population of these immigrants in regards to the total populations of immigrants immigrating per year. Especially between 1980 and 2005, these immigrants are constituting a large majority of the population immigrating to Texas per year. And this is in contrast to the South American countries that I found most consistently trended towards higher education, where the pink represents some college or above education for these 4 countries. And when we look at the portion of the population they constitute of immigrants to Texas per year of immigration, we see that it's a much smaller portion of the overall immigrating population. Interestingly, I also found that there are 4 countries in Asia for immigrants to Texas that never dropped below some college or above education levels during this time period. And when we look at the portion of the population, it's more than those for South America that I previously showed, but still not comparable to the original population of generally low-skilled immigrants from Central America and Mexico until the year 2022. And so when we compare these proportions and education levels of the population of immigrants to Texas, to the Texas visa allocations, I wasn't able to find visa allocations for all years I studied education because the data was limited in accessibility. But for the years this is available, we see H-1B or high-skilled visas are significantly outweighing the number of low-skilled visas. And when we compare this to the United States, we see that there is a point in which around 2017, 2018, where H-2A or agricultural low-skill visas do begin to outnumber the H-1B visa category, but the shift was not seen in Texas, which is especially significant because of the large portion of low-skill immigrants to Texas that we saw in my previous hypotheses. So I conclude overall, based on these hypotheses, that this Immigration Act would need to be reformed in order to better serve the streams of migration to Texas and the United States overall today, as well as the economies and their needs for the labor force. I suggest that to better inform this reform of policy, there would need to be additional state-based analyses similar to mine for other states that are largely populated by immigrant populations. So thank you all for listening to my presentation.
Thank you so much, Cosette. Any questions?
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I was curious about if any of your research kind of revealed how Texas as a border state impacted these numbers, and particularly as it related to undocumented immigration, maybe with the H-2A visa as well?
Yeah, so I would say that Texas as a border state definitely can highlight especially the findings that I found for Central America and Mexico, because of course many of these immigrants are crossing over the US border between Mexico and Texas. So this could show like why these proportions are so high, and also because the census and this kind of data does usually include a pretty large portion of undocumented immigrants. It could show that why there's so many low-skilled immigrants and yet so few allocations for visas, and yet the large portion of immigration continues from these types of countries. Thank you.
Awesome. First of all, incredible presentation.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, do you know, in terms of politics, if like Texas or any other states are doing anything to improve on this right now, currently?
I would say in regards to Texas specifically, a lot of the current legislation that they're proposing is actually to deter like undocumented immigration, and also just kind of limit the number of immigrants in general based on the fact that they feel that border states are being kind of given so many immigrants and not really having the resources to allocate to them. So I would say it's kind of pushing back on immigration a lot within Texas's current elected officials. I'm not so sure for other states. I haven't studied them as much. Thank you.
What do you think people either in Texas or in the U.S. in general could do to help support legislation or kind of fight back against this?
I think that it would I think it's definitely not an issue that maybe everyone knows about, especially in terms of like how few opportunities there can be for some people, for example, with lower education levels. So I think raising awareness to these kinds of issues would definitely help people so that they could more accurately like gather and, ask their elected officials for reform in these current national policies. Thank you.